The wind sliced through Timber Creek's courthouse square at 15 below, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals before they hit the ground. Nora Whitfield's hands were cracked and bleeding where they gripped the split-rail fence, splinters biting into her palms. But she couldn't let go. If she let go, she'd fall, and if she fell, everyone would see her knees shaking. The auctioneer's gavel rang against the frozen platform, iron on wood, sharp as a gunshot. Sold. Whitfield plow, $12 to Mr. Henderson. $12. Papa had paid $42 for that plow in '83, the year the wheat came in thick and golden. Nora's throat closed around a scream. Behind the auctioneer, Uncle Silas stood in his banker's suit, black wool and brass buttons, gold pocket watch glinting as he checked the time. The watch had Papa's initials engraved on the back, J.W., James Whitfield, but nobody seemed to notice that Silas wore a dead man's keepsake like a trophy. Next lot, the auctioneer called, breath steaming. Harrow and anvil, sold as set. Opening bid $8. Those are mine! Nora's voice cracked across the square, too loud, too desperate. Papa left them to me. The crowd turned. 50 faces, maybe more, all steam and judgment. One woman, Mrs. Pritchard from the general store, pulled her daughter close and whispered something that made the girl stare at the ground. The sheriff touched Nora's shoulder, not rough, but firm. Hush now, child. Your uncle's legal guardian. Silas pocketed the cash from the first sale, checked his watch again, that stolen watch with its engraved lie, and smiled at Nora. Not warm, not even cruel, really, just satisfied, like a man who'd done a day's accounting and found the numbers balanced in his favor. The auctioneer's voice rose again. Next lot, 40 head cattle, Whitfield Estate. Sunday auction, 2 weeks hence. Nora's knees buckled. Silas caught her elbow, leaned close enough that only she could hear. Behave, or the land goes too. At the edge of the crowd, a tall man in a cattleman's coat stood watching, silver threading his dark beard, shoulders broad under sheepskin, pale blue eyes that took in everything and gave back nothing. His jaw twitched once when Nora screamed. Just once. Then he turned and walked toward the livery, boot heels crunching through the snow. The auction ended an hour past noon. Nora stood in the courthouse yard while the crowd dispersed, her stomach empty and her vision swimming at the edges. The smell of wood smoke from nearby chimneys mixed with horse manure and the sharp bite of cold air that made her lungs ache. Doc Brennan found her leaning against the water trough, retching into the snow. Nothing came up. There was nothing in her to give, but her body convulsed anyway, trying to rid itself of something it couldn't name. Easy, child. The doctor's hands were gentle on her shoulders, steadying her. He smelled of carbolic acid and old leather, his medical bag worn soft from decades of house calls. When did you last eat? Nora wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Yesterday morning. And before that? She didn't answer. Doc Brennan tilted her face toward the light, studying her. His fingers found the bruises on her wrists where Silas had grabbed her the night before, purple-black against her pale skin. These aren't from falling. Nora pulled away. I'm clumsy. You delivered breech in your mother's womb, and I've known you since you drew first breath. You're many things, Nora Whitfield, but clumsy isn't one of them. He released her, but his eyes stayed sharp. Where's your uncle? Inside, settling the bank draft. Doc's mouth tightened. He looked toward the courthouse, then back at Nora. You're coming with me. I'm taking you to Mrs. Hollis for a proper meal. Uncle Silas said I'm to wait. Your uncle can find you at the schoolhouse when he's done counting his silver. They made it halfway across the square before Nora's legs gave out entirely. Doc caught her before she hit the ground, and that's when she heard it, the low rumble that meant her body had finally reached its limit. She'd been running on nothing for 3 days, ever since Silas locked her in the root cellar for talking back, when she'd asked to see her parents' will. Steady now. Doc lifted her like she weighed nothing, which wasn't far from true. Lord Almighty, child, your light is kindling. The words hit somewhere deep. Papa used to say that about the cottonwood branches they'd gather for starting fires. Light as kindling, but they burn hot and fast. She'd always been small for her age, but this was different. This was hunger carved into bone. Doc carried her 3 blocks to the schoolhouse, where Beatrice Hollis met them at the door. The teacher was 30-something, unmarried, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that missed nothing. Merciful God! Beatrice took in Nora's condition in a single glance. Bring her to the back room. Inside, the schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust and the bread Beatrice kept for students who came without lunch. Doc set Nora in a chair by the stove while Beatrice disappeared into her private quarters. She returned with a blanket, a cup of warm broth, and a fury that radiated off her like heat. "This is Silas Cartwright's doing." "Aye." Doc kept his voice low, and the whole town watched it happen. Nora wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her cracked palms. The broth was chicken, probably, with pepper that made her eyes water. She sipped it slowly, afraid her stomach would reject even this kindness. "Nora," Beatrice knelt beside the chair, meeting her at eye level. "How long has he been starving you?" "I'm not," Nora started, then stopped. What was the point of lying? "Since Mama and Papa died, he says I have to earn my keep, that I owe him $600 for their debts." Doc and Beatrice exchanged a look that made Nora's chest tighten. "Your parents didn't die in debt, child." Doc's voice was careful, like he was picking his way through a conversation that could explode. "I was there when your father sold that wheat crop in '83. He banked nearly $2,000, and your mother kept books tighter than a ship's captain. Uncle Silas showed me the ledger. It said—" "I don't care what it said." Doc straightened, his jaw set. "Something's wrong here. Very wrong." Beatrice handed Nora a piece of bread, fresh enough that steam still rose from it. "Eat, then we're taking you somewhere safe." "Where?" Nora tore into the bread, dignity forgotten. "He's my legal guardian. The sheriff said so." "The sheriff said what the papers told him to say." Doc moved to the window, watching the street. "But papers can lie, girl. Men lie. The question is what we do about it." The bread hit Nora's stomach like a stone, heavy and real. She hadn't realized how empty she'd been until something filled the space. Outside, the winter sun was already dropping toward the mountains. In 2 hours it would be dark. In 2 weeks, Silas would sell her parents' cattle at another auction, 40 head that represented 3 years of her father's work. And after that— "The land," Nora whispered. "He said the land goes next." Doc turned from the window. "When?" He didn't say exactly, but soon. She looked up at him, at Beatrice, at these two adults who seemed to care whether she lived or died. Nobody's going to stop him, are they? Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. That night, after Doc convinced Silas that Nora needed to stay at the schoolhouse for medical observation, she lay on Beatrice's spare bed and listened to the wind rattle the windows. The blanket smelled of lavender soap, the pillow was soft, her stomach was full for the first time in weeks, but sleep wouldn't come, because she kept seeing Uncle Silas's smile when he'd caught her elbow in the courthouse square, the way he'd checked that stolen watch, so casual, so certain of his victory, the way nobody, not one single person in that crowd, had stepped forward to say, "This is wrong." And somewhere in the darkness, outside Timber Creek, a blizzard was building. The blizzard hit 3 nights later, the kind that turned the world into a white roar and made lanterns useless past 10 feet. Nora woke to the sound of someone pounding on the schoolhouse door, not knocking, pounding, fist against wood like they meant to break through. Beatrice reached the door first, still in her nightgown, a fireplace poker gripped in one hand. "Who's there?" "Sheriff Reeves." "Open up, Miss Hollis." The door swung inward, bringing a wall of snow and wind. Sheriff Reeves stood on the threshold, his mustache crusted with ice, and behind him, Uncle Silas, dressed like he was heading to Sunday service despite the storm. His gold watch chain gleamed even in the dim light. "The girl comes with me." Silas's voice was flat, businesslike. "Now." "She's ill." Beatrice blocked the doorway, poker still in hand. Doc Brennan ordered bed rest. "I'm her legal guardian, and I'm ordering her home." Silas produced a folded document from his coat, handed it to the sheriff. Signed by Judge Clayton himself before he left for circuit court. Sheriff Reeves unfolded the paper, read it by the light of Beatrice's lamp. His face gave nothing away, but Nora saw his shoulders drop half an inch, the posture of a man who'd been hoping for different words. "It's legitimate." The sheriff looked at Beatrice, then at Nora, who'd appeared in the doorway to the back room, wrapped in the lavender blanket. "I'm sorry, Miss Hollis. Law's the law." "The law?" Beatrice's voice could have cut glass. "The law says a man can starve his niece." "The law says he's her guardian." Sheriff Reeves folded the paper, handed it back to Silas. "Unless Doc Brennan wants to sign an affidavit saying she's unfit to travel, I'll sign it." Doc Brennan's voice came from the doorway, where he'd just arrived, snow coating his hat and shoulders. He must have been watching Silas's house, waiting for exactly this. "Tonight. Right now." Silas smiled. "Not warm, never warm." You'll risk your medical license on a lie, Samuel? Who said anything about lying? The girl's perfectly healthy. A bit theatrical, perhaps, but healthy. Silas turned to Nora, and his voice softened into something that might fool someone who didn't know better. Tell them, Nora. Tell them you're well enough to come home. Nora's hands tightened on the blanket. If she said yes, she'd be back in that house, back in that cellar, when she misbehaved. If she said no, Doc would lose his license for her, and she'd end up there anyway because the sheriff would have no choice. The wind howled through the open door. Snow swirled across the floorboards. I'm well enough, Nora whispered. Doc's face went rigid. Beatrice made a sound like she'd been struck. There. Silas gestured toward the back room. Get your things. She's wearing a nightgown. Beatrice's voice shook with fury. In a blizzard. At least let her dress. 5 minutes. Sheriff Reeves cut in, trying to salvage something decent from this mess. The girl deserves that much. Nora dressed in the back room, her fingers numb and clumsy on the buttons of her worn brown dress, the one Mama had made 3 years ago, before everything turned to ash and ice. Through the thin wall, she could hear voices. You're making a mistake. Doc, low and dangerous. I'm following the law. Sheriff Reeves, tired. The law can be changed. Beatrice, desperate. Not by me, ma'am. Not tonight. The sheriff paused. If you've got evidence of abuse, bring it to me proper. File a complaint, but right now, all I've got is a legal document and a guardian claiming his ward. When Nora emerged, Silas was already at the door. He didn't reach for her, didn't touch her. He was too smart for that with witnesses present. Just stood waiting, patient as winter. Doc Brennan knelt in front of Nora, his old knees cracking. If you need help, any help at all, you come find me. Middle of the night, doesn't matter, you run. Where would I run? The question came out smaller than she'd meant it. Doc had no answer for that. The walk to Silas's house took 20 minutes through knee-deep snow. Nora's thin coat, the only one she had left after Silas sold her winter one at the last auction, did almost nothing against the wind. Her uncle walked 3 paces ahead, not looking back, not checking if she kept up. The only sound was the howl of the storm and the crunch of their boots. Inside, the house smelled of cigar smoke and old grease. Silas lit a lamp, hung his coat on the hook by the door, and checked his pocket watch. The gold caught the light, and Nora saw it clearly now, those initials, J.W., engraved in her father's careful hand. You embarrassed me. Silas's voice was conversational, almost friendly. In front of the sheriff, in front of that meddling teacher. I didn't mean the cellar. Now. Nora's stomach dropped. The cellar was 5 feet deep, dirt floor, no heat. There was a cot down there and a chamber pot and nothing else. In summer, it was bearable. In January, with a blizzard raging outside, please, the words scraped out of her. I'll be good, I promise. I know you will. Silas opened the cellar door. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of damp earth and old potatoes. 3 days should remind you who decides what's yours and what isn't. 3 days? I'll freeze. Children fear discipline, but they need it. He gestured toward the stairs. Down. Nora descended into the dark. The door closed above her. She heard the bolt slide home, metal on metal, final as a grave. She felt her way to the cot, wrapped herself in the single thin blanket she'd left down here the last time, and tried not to think about the cold seeping up through the dirt floor, tried not to think about 3 days without food, tried not to think about the cattle auction coming in 11 days, and after that, the land, and after that, nothing. Above her, she heard Silas moving around the kitchen, the clink of a glass, the scratch of a match, then his footsteps crossing to his study, where he kept his ledgers and his papers and all the lies that said he owned what wasn't his. Nora closed her eyes and tried to remember what her father's voice sounded like when he read her bedtime stories. Tried to remember her mother's hands, ink-stained from keeping books, strong from kneading bread. But the cold kept pushing the memories away, and all she could hear was the wind and the bolt and the sound of her own breathing in the dark. 4 miles north, at the edge of the Ashford Ranch, a dog started barking. Nora woke on the second day to the sound of the cellar door opening. Not Silas. His footsteps were heavier, more deliberate. These were lighter, quicker, and accompanied by a woman's voice calling down. Nora? Child? Are you alive down there? Beatrice Hollis descended the stairs with a lamp in one hand and a basket in the other. Behind her came Doc Brennan, his face grim in the flickering light. How did you... Nora's voice cracked from disuse. Your uncle's at the bank. Beatrice knelt beside the cot, setting the basket down. The smell of fresh bread made Nora's stomach clench. We don't have long. Doc examined her with practiced efficiency, checking her pulse, her fingernails, the color of her lips. Mild hypothermia. Another day down here and we'd be carrying you out. He said 3 days. He won't get 3 days. Doc's jaw was set in a way that reminded Nora of her father when he'd made up his mind about something. I've been doing some thinking about your parents' estate, some investigating. Beatrice unwrapped the bread, pressed it into Nora's hands. Eat, slowly. Nora tore into it anyway, her body overruling her mind. The bread was still warm, yeasty, and dense, the kind her mother used to make on Saturday mornings. She had to force herself to chew, to swallow, to not just inhale it whole. Your father banked with Silas, didn't he? Doc kept his voice low, casual, like they were discussing the weather. Nora nodded, mouth full. And your mother kept the household books. Another nod. Did you ever see those books? The ledgers? Nora swallowed. Mama taught me. She said a woman who couldn't keep accounts was a woman who'd be cheated. Beatrice and Doc exchanged a look. What did your mother's ledgers show? Doc leaned forward. Think carefully, Nora. This matters. Everything. Every penny Papa earned from the wheat crops. Every dollar spent on seed and equipment. Nora stopped, understanding dawning cold and clear. The savings account? Mama recorded every deposit. There was $8,000 the month before they died. The lamp flame guttered in a draft. Somewhere above them a floorboard creaked, just the house settling probably, but all three of them froze. 8,000. Doc said it quietly, like he was afraid speaking too loud would make it disappear. Your uncle's claiming they died penniless. He showed me his ledger. It said they owed him 600. Did you see the original documents, bank statements, the actual account books? Nora shook her head. Just his ledger. He wouldn't let me touch the papers. Beatrice's hand tightened on Nora's shoulder. Because he's hiding something. Or he destroyed it. Doc stood, pacing the small space of the cellar. His boots left prints in the dirt floor. But there'd be records at the county seat, the original will, account transfers, a paper trail. The vault. Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper. Everything's in the bank vault, which Silas controls. Not after hours. Beatrice met Doc's eyes. Not if someone knew how to pick a lock. That's breaking and entering. That's finding proof. Beatrice stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. I saw my father pick locks for 20 years when he was locksmith in Denver. Some skills you don't forget. Doc was quiet for a long moment, weighing something Nora couldn't see. Then, if we're caught, we won't be. If we are, I lose my license. You lose your teaching position, and Silas gets exactly the excuse he needs to ship Nora off where we can't reach her. And if we do nothing, Beatrice's voice went sharp. He sells the cattle in 9 days, then the land, then this child disappears into whatever hole he's planned for her. She paused. I won't watch another girl get swallowed by men who think power makes them righteous. Something in her tone made Nora look up. There was a story there, old and scarred over. Doc pulled out his pocket watch, plain silver, no engravings, honest, and checked the time. Silas closes the bank at 5. Night watchman makes rounds every 2 hours starting at 8. So we go at 9. Beatrice picked up her basket. Long enough after closing that Silas is home. Early enough that the watchman's just started his route. You're serious about this? As plague. Beatrice looked at Nora. We're getting you out of the cellar today. Tonight, we're getting the proof. Tomorrow, we take it to Sheriff Reeves and dare him to ignore what's written in ink. Doc nodded slowly. I'll need to get Nora somewhere safe first. Somewhere Silas can't reach her before we have the evidence. The Ashford Ranch. The words came out of Nora before she'd fully thought them through. The man at the auction, the tall one who watched. Garrett Ashford? Doc frowned. I don't know him well. Keeps to himself since his wife and daughter passed. He watched. Nora clutched the blanket tighter. When I screamed about the tools being mine, everyone else looked away. He watched. Watching isn't helping. It's more than the others did. Beatrice considered this. Ashford's got money, land. No one would dare challenge him if he decided to shelter someone. She paused. And his ranch is 4 miles from town. far enough that if Silas came calling, there'd be witnesses to whatever happened next. You're asking me to dump a traumatized child on a stranger's doorstep. Doc's tone was flat. I'm asking you to give her a fighting chance. Beatrice handed Nora another piece of bread, this one wrapped in cloth. Hide this for later. Nora tucked it into her dress pocket, the weight of it a small comfort. Above them, the front door opened and closed, heavy footsteps. Silas, back from the bank earlier than expected. Doc blew out the lamp. In the sudden darkness, Nora heard Beatrice whisper, "Not a sound. We were never here." They crept up the cellar stairs like ghosts. Doc first, then Beatrice, moving with a silence that shouldn't have been possible for adults. At the top, Doc eased the door open an inch, peering through the gap. Silas was in his study, back to the hallway, bent over his desk. Doc and Beatrice slipped through the kitchen like smoke, out the back door, into the gray afternoon. The door clicked shut so softly Nora barely heard it. She was alone again in the cellar, but the bread in her pocket was warm, and somewhere in the darkness above, two people were planning to break the law for her. It was the first hope she'd felt in 6 months. In his study, Silas Cartwright pulled out a document marked Whitfield Estate Liquidation Schedule and added a new line. Land auction, April 28th, County Courthouse. Starting bid $5,000. Then he checked his pocket watch and smiled. Doc Brennan came for Nora that night while Silas was at a town council meeting. No explanation, no discussion, just opened the cellar door, helped her up the stairs, and wrapped her in his wool coat that smelled of pipe tobacco and winter air. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. Doc lifted her onto his horse, mounted behind her. Hold on. They rode north through snow that had turned to ice, the horse's breath steaming in the moonlight. Nora's legs were numb from 2 days in the cellar, her hands clumsy where they gripped the saddle horn. Every jolt sent pain through her cold, stiffened joints. 4 miles felt like 40. The Ashford Ranch rose out of the darkness like something from a fever dream. 2 stories of timber and stone, lamplight glowing in the windows, smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Barns and outbuildings clustered nearby, and beyond them cattle in winter pens, their lowing a low chorus under the wind. Doc dismounted, helped Nora down. Her legs buckled when they hit the ground. The front door opened before they reached it. The tall man from the auction stood silhouetted against the light. Garrett Ashford, though Nora hadn't known his name until today. Up close, he was older than she'd thought. Silver threading his dark beard, lines carved deep around his eyes. He looked at Nora, then at Doc, and his expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Samuel. His voice was quiet, rough from disuse. What's this? This is trouble. Doc steadied Nora with one hand. The kind that needs shelter for a night, maybe 2. Whose trouble? Silas Cartwright's niece. Garrett's jaw tightened. The girl from the auction. Her name's Nora Whitfield, and if Silas finds her before I get proof of what he's done, she won't live to see spring. A Mexican man appeared in the doorway behind Garrett, older, weathered, with the careful movements of someone who'd worked cattle all his life. Boss? Miguel. Garrett didn't take his eyes off Nora. Get Rosa. Tell her we need a bed made up in the east room. See? Miguel disappeared into the house. Garrett stepped aside. Come in. The house smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something baking, bread or biscuits, Nora couldn't tell. The warmth hit her like a wall, making her skin prickle and burn as blood returned to frozen places. Her vision sim. Easy. Garrett caught her elbow, the same place Silas had grabbed, but the touch was different, steadying, not restraining. He guided her to a chair by the fireplace. Sit before you fall. A woman emerged from the kitchen, Rosa, gray-haired and competent, carrying a quilt that smelled of cedar and lavender. She took one look at Nora and started speaking rapid Spanish to Garrett, too fast for Nora to follow, even if she'd known the language. Garrett's face went hard. How long? 2 days in a cellar. Doc crouched beside Nora's chair, checking her pulse again. Before that, systematic starvation. I'd estimate she's lost 15 pounds since her parents died. 15 pounds. Garrett said it like he was testing the weight of the words. She couldn't have weighed 90 to start. Closer to 80, I'd guess. Rosa wrapped the quilt around Nora's shoulders, tucking it tight. Then she disappeared back to the kitchen and returned with a mug of something that steamed and smelled of chicken and herbs. Sip. Rosa pressed the mug into Nora's hands. Slow. Your stomach will rebel if you rush. The broth was rich and salty and made Nora's eyes water. She drank it in careful mouthfuls while the adults talked over her head. What proof are you looking for? Garrett kept his voice low. Original will, estate documents, account books. Doc pulled up a chair, straddling it backward. I'm breaking into the bank vault tonight. That's a hanging offense. So is what Silas is doing to this child, if anyone cared to call it what it is. Garrett was quiet for a moment. If you're caught, you lose everything. If I do nothing, I've already lost what matters. Doc looked at Nora. Her parents were good people. James Whitfield once rode 20 miles through a storm to bring me turpentine when I ran out during a diphtheria outbreak. Said he figured I'd need it more than he did. He paused. A man doesn't forget that kind of decency. Decency doesn't hold up in court. Evidence does. Doc stood. I need you to keep her here, just until I can get what we need and bring it to Sheriff Reeves. And if Silas comes looking, tell him she ran away. Tell him you haven't seen her. Tell him whatever keeps her alive long enough for justice to catch up with his lies. Garrett looked at Nora again. She met his eyes, pale blue and weathered, the kind that had seen things and chosen not to look away. Something passed between them, understanding without words. She can stay, Garrett's voice was final. As long as she needs. Doc gripped his shoulder. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. Doc headed for the door, then stopped. One more thing. If this goes wrong, if I'm caught or killed or whatever happens, you get her to Judge Clayton when he comes back through on circuit. Make him look at her. Make him see what's been done. Samuel, promise me. Garrett nodded once. You have my word. After Doc left, the house fell into an awkward silence. Rosa brought food, beef stew with potatoes, fresh bread, milk still warm from the evening milking. Nora ate mechanically, her body taking over where her mind had gone numb. Miguel appeared briefly, reporting that the horses were fed and the barn secured for the night. He nodded at Nora, a small gesture, but deliberate, like he was acknowledging her right to be there. Finally, Rosa led Nora upstairs to a bedroom with a real bed, clean sheets, a window that looked out over snow-covered pastures. Nora stood in the doorway, unable to make herself cross the threshold. I'll get the floor muddy. Rosa made a sound that might have been laughter or exasperation. Child, floors can be washed. Come. The room smelled of beeswax and pine. There was a dresser with a pitcher and basin, a wardrobe with the door slightly open, a small shelf of books, and on the windowsill, Nora froze. A carved wooden horse, no bigger than her hand, painted dapple gray with careful detail. The kind of toy someone had loved once. Rosa saw where she was looking. Her face softened, then tightened with something that looked like old grief. That was Ruth's, Mr. Ashford's daughter. Where is she? With God. Rosa pulled back the quilt on the bed. 2 winters passed. Pneumonia took her fast. Nora picked up the horse carefully, like it might disappear. The wood was smooth from being held, the paint worn in places. A child had loved this, had played with it, had probably fallen asleep with it clutched in small hands. How old was she? 9. The same age Nora had been when her parents died. She set the horse back on the windowsill, exactly where it had been. Sleep. Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. Tomorrow will come whether you're ready or not. After Rosa left, Nora climbed into the bed. The sheets were soft, the quilt heavy enough to feel like safety. Through the wall, she could hear footsteps, back and forth, back and forth. Garrett Ashford, pacing in the next room. Neither of them slept that night. But somewhere in Timber Creek, Doc Brennan and Beatrice Hollis were picking the lock on a bank vault, and Silas Cartwright was coming home to find an empty cellar. The storm was about to break. 2 weeks later, the Sunday cattle auction drew a crowd of 75, maybe more. The courthouse steps were packed with ranchers and townspeople, all bundled against the February cold that had turned the snow to hard crust underfoot. Nora stood on the platform beside the auctioneer, 40 head of cattle penned below, each one wearing her father's brand, a simple W inside a circle. She'd insisted on being here despite Garrett's objections, despite Doc's warnings. If they were going to steal her life piece by piece, she'd make them look at her while they did it. Silas stood to her left, dressed in his Sunday best, gold watch chain gleaming. To her right, the auctioneer cleared his throat. 40 head, prime breeding stock, Whitfield estate liquidation, opening bid $1,000. $1,500. Garrett's voice cut across the crowd. He stood at the base of the platform, Miguel beside him, his face unreadable. 2,000. a rancher from the South County. 2,500. Garrett again. The bidding went fast. 3,200, 35, 4,000. When it hit 4,500, the other bidders dropped out. Too rich for cattle that weren't breeding bulls. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel fell. 40 head to Garrett Ashford for $4,500. The crowd murmured. That was 3,000 over market value, maybe more. Nora's throat closed. He'd bought them. Her father's cattle, the herd James Whitfield had built from 20 head over 10 years of patient breeding and careful culling. Garrett Ashford now owned them. Except he didn't. Not really. Because legally, they still belonged to the Cartwright estate liquidation. And all Garrett had done was make Silas richer. Something broke inside Nora then. Not her will, but her silence. These are my cattle. Her voice rang across the courthouse square, too loud, too desperate, but she didn't care anymore. My parents bought the first 20 head in 1883 with money from selling wheat. They're not his to sell. The crowd went quiet, uncomfortable. Women looked at their husbands, men studied their boots. She's confused. Silas's voice was smooth, practiced. Her parents died penniless, God rest them. I'm protecting her from a harsh truth. You're wearing my father's watch. The words landed like stones in still water. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Silas's hand went instinctively to his pocket, to the gold chain, and in that moment, just a heartbeat, his face showed something ugly. Then it smoothed over, but not before half the crowd saw it. Your father gave me this watch before he died, as payment for— You're a liar, Nora's voice cracked. Mama kept books. She wrote down every penny. There was $8,000 in the bank when they died. Enough. Silas grabbed her arm, not gently, not carefully, the way he did in private. The bruises on her wrists flared with pain. Garrett was on the platform in 3 strides. Let her go. She's my ward. She's a child who's been starved and locked in cellars. Doc Brennan's voice came from the edge of the crowd. I've documented the evidence. The crowd shifted. This was getting interesting now. This was gossip that would last weeks. Sheriff Reeves pushed through to the platform. That's a serious accusation, Doc. It's a serious crime. Doc climbed the steps, medical bag in hand. He pulled out a folder. Papers, photographs, written statements. Malnourishment, bruises consistent with restraint, systematic isolation. He met Silas's eyes. And that's just what I can prove medically. The girl's dramatic. Silas released Nora's arm, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen him grab her. Children need discipline. Children need food. Beatrice Hollis's voice cut through the murmurs. She stood with a group of women, mothers, most of them, wives of the men who'd bid on the cattle. I've seen the bruises. I've watched this child nearly collapse from hunger. She paused. If this is guardianship, God help us all. The crowd was turning. Nora could feel it, the shift from uncomfortable witness to something sharper, angrier. Silas felt it too. His face hardened. You want to know the truth? He pulled a document from his coat, unfolded it. Fine. The truth is, Nora's parents left debts I've been paying from my own pocket for 6 months. The truth is, I'm losing money keeping her fed and clothed. The truth is, he looked directly at Garrett. Some people in this town think they can buy their way into playing savior. But charity has limits. So does fraud. Doc's voice was quiet but carried. I have the original will, Silas, from the vault, witnessed and signed. James and Martha Whitfield left everything to Nora. Not to you. You were never named executor. The silence that followed was absolute. Silas's face went white, then red. That's breaking and entering. That's evidence. Sheriff Reeves held out his hand. Let me see it, Doc. But before Doc could move, Silas played his final card. Sheriff, I'm placing Nora Whitfield on the orphan train to St. Louis. His voice was level, businesslike. Departure is March 15th. That's 26 days. As her legal guardian, I'm exercising my right to place her in a more suitable situation. The words hit Nora like a physical blow. The orphan train. She'd heard stories. Children sent east to work in factories, on farms, never seen again. Some found good homes. Most didn't. You can't. The words came out strangled. I can, and I will. Silas looked at the crowd. Unless someone wants to challenge my legal guardianship in court, which, I remind you, requires a judge. He smiled. And Judge Clayton won't return from circuit for another 5 weeks. 5 weeks. After the orphan train Wyatt had left, after Nora disappeared. Sheriff Reeves looked at Doc, at Garrett, at Nora. Is this true about the judge? He's in the Northern Territories, the sheriff's deputy confirmed. Won't be back until late March. Checkmate. Silas had timed it perfectly. Garrett stepped forward. I'll file for emergency guardianship. On what grounds? Silas's smile widened. You're a bachelor with no family, no female presence in your household, no experience with children. He paused. And you've been harboring my ward illegally for 2 weeks. If anything, Mr. Ashford, you should be facing charges. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. The law was the law, after all. Nora felt the world closing in. The platform too small, the air too thin, the faces below blurring into a wall of judgment and indifference. Then Garrett's hand settled on her shoulder. Not restraining, steadying. She stays with me. His voice was quiet but absolute. Until Judge Clayton returns. Until this gets sorted legal and proper. You'll be arrested. Then arrest me. Garrett met the sheriff's eyes. But you'll have to explain to Judge Clayton why you put a child back in the hands of a man who starves her while you wait for paperwork. Sheriff Reeves looked tired, old, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I need to see that will, Doc, and those medical records. Today. You'll have them within the hour. And you, the sheriff pointed at Silas, don't leave town. We're going to sort this mess out, and if even half of what they're saying is true, you'll answer for it. But Silas was already smiling, because he knew what they all knew. Evidence without a judge was just paper, and Nora would be on a train to St. Louis before justice ever caught up. As the crowd dispersed, Nora heard the whispers, saw the looks. Half the town thought Garrett was a fool. The other half thought he was something worse, a rich man using a desperate girl for his own purposes. Only Beatrice and Doc and Miguel stood with them as the platform emptied. 26 days, Beatrice said it like a curse. Then we have 26 days to stop him. Garrett lifted Nora down from the platform. Come on, let's go home. Home. The word hung in the frozen air like a promise no one could keep. The days after the cattle auction felt like waiting for an axe to fall. Nora woke each morning counting down 24 days, 23, 22, until the orphan train would take her so far from Montana she'd never find her way back. Garrett found her in the barn on the 5th morning, mucking stalls when she should have been eating breakfast. She'd been up since before dawn, moving from chore to chore like motion could outrun dread. You don't have to work for your keep. He leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. Roses made hotcakes. I need to earn it. Nora didn't look up from the pitchfork. Everyone earns their keep. Who told you that? Uncle Silas. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he took the pitchfork from her hands, gently but firmly, and set it against the wall. Come with me. He led her to the ranch office, a small room off the main house that smelled of leather and paper and ink. The desk was buried under ledgers, receipts, bills of sale, the accumulated chaos of a man who understood cattle but had no patience for bookkeeping. I need help. Garrett pulled out a chair for her. These accounts are a mess. Rosa does her best, but numbers aren't her strength. Nora looked at the ledgers. Even from across the room, she could see the disorganization, dates out of sequence, entries without categories, addition errors in the margins. Miguel says you helped your mother keep books. Mama taught me. Nora moved closer to the desk, curiosity overcoming caution. She opened the top ledger, ran her finger down the columns. You paid Henderson $22 for grain in October, but he invoiced you for $18. You gave him $4 extra. Did I? Garrett leaned over her shoulder to look. And here, she flipped back 3 pages. You recorded the cattle sale to Morrison as $3,000, but the bank deposit shows $3,200. Someone's pocketing the difference. Garrett went very still. Show me. Nora laid out the evidence in neat rows. 6 transactions over 3 months where the amounts didn't match. Small enough that no one would notice unless they were looking. Large enough that together they added up to nearly $600. Who handles your deposits? Miguel takes them to town. Garrett's face was grim. But he doesn't make them himself. He gives them to the banker. Nora met his eyes. Uncle Silas handles deposits for most of the ranchers. He's been skimming. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. If he's stealing from me, he's stealing from others. Garrett straightened. And if he's desperate enough to skim $600 in 3 months, he's desperate enough to liquidate an entire estate. Nora's throat went tight. He needs money, fast. That's why he's selling everything so quickly. The question is, why? Garrett pulled up a chair beside her. Men don't steal unless they're covering something. A debt, maybe, or a bad investment. Nora thought about the way Silas checked his watch compulsively, the way his hands shook sometimes when he thought no one was looking, the expensive suit that didn't quite hide the fraying at the cuffs. Can you fix these? Garrett gestured at the ledgers. Get them organized proper? It'll take a few days. Take as long as you need. He paused. And Nora, this is honest work. You're not earning charity, you're earning wages. I don't need $1 a day, same as I pay the ranch hands for bookkeeping. $1 a day. In 26 days, that would be $26. Not enough to matter in the scheme of things, but enough to prove she wasn't dead weight. Thank you. The words came out small. Garrett stood, headed for the door, then stopped. My daughter would have been about your age now, 11, maybe 12. His voice was rough. She used to line up her toy horses in rows, organizing them by color and size. Drove her mother mad, all that precision in a child. He didn't turn around. I'm not trying to replace her with you. I want you to know that. I know. But maybe, he cleared his throat, maybe we can help each other not disappear. After he left, Nora sat alone with the ledgers, running her fingers over the numbers. Her mother's voice came back to her, patient and clear. A woman who knows accounts can't be cheated, Nora. Numbers don't lie, even when men do. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started creating order from chaos. 3 days later, she found it. The pattern was buried in old files, records from 6 months before her parents died. Silas had sold 3 properties in rapid succession, not his own properties, but ones he held in trust for clients. The sales were legal, documented, properly recorded, but the deposits never made it to the clients' accounts. Nora's hands shook as she cross-referenced dates and amounts. $12,000 stolen and hidden across 18 months of careful fraud. And when someone finally noticed, probably her father, who'd kept meticulous records, she thought about the fire that killed her parents, how the sheriff had ruled it an accident. A lamp knocked over in the night. These things happened, but her father never left lamps burning. Garrett! She ran from the office, found him in the barn with Miguel. I found something. She showed them the papers, explained the pattern, watched their faces harden as understanding settled in. If your father discovered this, Miguel didn't finish the sentence. He would have confronted Silas. Garrett's voice was flat. Demanded restitution, threatened to go to the law. And Silas couldn't let that happen. Nora felt cold despite the warmth of the barn. So we don't know that. Garrett cut her off, but his tone said he believed it anyway. We can't prove it. But we can prove the fraud. Nora held up the papers. This proves he's a thief. Maybe that's enough to stop the orphan train. Maybe. Garrett took the papers, studied them. We need to show these to Sheriff Reeves, and we need to do it before Silas realizes we're looking at records he thought were buried. That afternoon, Beatrice arrived at the ranch with news. She found them in the kitchen where Rosa was kneading bread and Nora was helping roll out dough. I've been talking to the mothers in town. Beatrice's face was flushed from the cold ride. About testifying, about what they've seen. And, Garrett poured her coffee, 20 women have agreed to speak up if it comes to a hearing. Beatrice wrapped her hands around the mug. They're scared. Silas holds their husbands' loans, their mortgages, but they're angry too, angry enough to risk it. 20 witnesses. Miguel nodded slowly. That's a start. It's more than a start. It's a wall. Beatrice looked at Nora. If 20 mothers stand up and say what they've seen, the bruises, the hunger, the fear, even without a judge present, the sheriff will have to act. Or he'll call them hysterical. Garrett's tone was bitter. Women's testimony doesn't carry the same weight. Then we make it carry weight. Beatrice set down her mug with a sharp click. We organize. We coordinate. We make sure that when the time comes, we're not just voices, we're a chorus. Nora watched the adults plan, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not hope exactly, hope was too fragile, but something close to it, something that felt like possibility. That night, she stood at her bedroom window looking at the carved wooden horse on the sill. Ruth's horse. The daughter who'd organized things by color and size, who'd died before her father could save her. Nora picked up the horse carefully. The paint was worn smooth in places loved bare. "I won't disappear," she whispered to the darkness. "I won't let him erase me." Behind her, through the wall, she heard Garrett's footsteps, back and forth, back and forth, neither of them sleeping, both of them counting down, 21 days until the orphan train. 21 days to prove that justice could move faster than a locomotive. The rumors started on Sunday, spreading through the churchyard like rot through timber. Garrett Ashford was using the Whitfield girl to get her land cheap, planning to marry her off to Miguel's nephew when she turned 16, merge the properties. A rich man's scheme dressed up as charity. By Monday, the whispers had teeth. Rosa heard them at the general store, came home tight-lipped and furious. Miguel heard them from the other ranch hands at the feed supplier. Even Doc Brennan reported that patients were asking pointed questions about that situation at the Ashford place. Nora heard the worst of it from Beatrice, who rode out Tuesday afternoon with her face pale and her hands shaking. "Mrs. Pritchard is telling everyone you're—" Beatrice stopped, looking at Nora. "That you're not really orphaned, that you and your uncle had a fight and you ran away, and now you're manipulating a lonely widower." "That's not—" Nora's voice failed. "I know it's not true." Beatrice gripped her hands. "But Silas is smart. He's not attacking Garrett directly. He's attacking you, making you look like the problem." Garrett stood at the window, watching the road. "How bad is it?" "The Reverend came to see me this morning." Beatrice's voice was quiet. "He asked if there was truth to the concerns about your household, about the propriety of a bachelor sheltering a young girl." "What did you tell him?" "That anyone who'd spent 5 minutes with Nora would know she's terrified and half-starved, not scheming." Beatrice paused. "But he's worried about appearances, about what the town thinks." "The town?" Garrett's jaw worked. "The same town that watched her scream about stolen property and did nothing." "That's not fair," Beatrice stood. "Half of them want to help. They're just afraid." "Afraid of what? A banker with a gold watch and dirty hands? Afraid of their mortgages being called, their loans being denied, their businesses being squeezed?" Beatrice's voice rose. "Silas controls the money in this town, Garrett. He controls everything." The truth of it settled heavy in the room. That night, Doc Brennan arrived with worse news. He found Garrett in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. "I've been digging into Silas's finances." Doc kept his voice low, though they were alone. "Calling in favors from colleagues in other territories." "And?" "He's got debts, serious ones. $15,000 to a railroad syndicate out of Kansas City." Doc pulled out a telegram. "They're expanding through Montana, looking to buy up land for right-of-way." Garrett took the telegram, read it by lamplight. "The Whitfield property sits right in their path. Not just sits, it's the keystone. Without it, they'd have to route 20 miles north through mountains. With it, they save 2 years of construction and $500,000 in cost." "So Silas isn't just stealing from Nora." Garrett's voice was flat. "He's brokering a deal. Worse. If he doesn't deliver the land, the syndicate will call his debts. He'll lose the bank, his house, everything." Doc leaned against the stall door. "He's not just desperate. He's cornered." "Which makes him dangerous." "More than you know." Doc hesitated. "I found something else. The syndicate's sending a representative to the land auction. A man named Caldwell. He's bringing $20,000 in cash." $20,000. More than the property was worth. More than Garrett could match without bankrupting himself. "When's the auction?" "April 28th, the day before Judge Clayton returns to circuit." Doc met his eyes. "Silas timed it perfectly. Even if we get the judge to look at the evidence, it'll be too late. The land will be sold, the deal done." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, thinking. If the syndicate needs this land that badly, they'll do anything to protect their investment, including protect Silas. Which means exposing him early could backfire. They'd just replace him with someone else. Someone we can't touch. "So we're trapped." Doc's shoulders sagged. "We expose him now, we lose. We wait for the judge, the land sells anyway." "Not trapped." Garrett straightened. "Just playing a longer game than I thought." "We don't have time for a long game. 14 days until the orphan train. Then we change the battlefield." Garrett's voice was quiet but certain. "Silas thinks he's won because he controls the money and the timeline. But there's something he doesn't control." "What?" 20 mothers? who are angry enough to stand witness. Garrett moved to the barn door, looking toward the house where Nora was helping Rosa with supper. "And a girl who can prove fraud in numbers that don't lie." Doc followed his gaze. "You're going to make this public." "Oh, not just public, undeniable." Garrett turned back. "If the whole town sees the evidence, not through rumors or whispers, but laid out clear as daylight, then even the syndicate can't bury it." "That's a hell of a gamble. It's the only one we've got." Garrett paused. "Can you get me the names of everyone Silas has stolen from? Not just Nora. Everyone." "I can try." "And Beatrice's mothers? Can they be ready to testify before the auction? If you give them something worth risking their necks for." "I will." Garrett's face was set, determined. "We're going to that courthouse on April 28th, and we're going to make Silas Cartwright answer for every dollar, every lie, every bruise." He paused. "In front of God, in the railroad, and everyone who's been too afraid to ask questions." Doc studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You know this might not work." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I am." "Why? You barely know this girl." Garrett looked back toward the house, where lamplight glowed in the kitchen windows. "Because someone has to." In town, Silas Cartwright sat in his study counting money that wasn't his, checking his watch every few minutes, waiting for a telegram from Kansas City that would confirm the syndicate's arrival. 14 days until the orphan train, 26 days until the auction. He smiled. Everything was going according to plan. 3 days before the auction, Miguel rode back from the Northern Territories covered in mud and exhaustion. His horse was lathered, limping slightly, and Miguel himself looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Garrett met him at the barn. One look at Miguel's face told him everything. "You didn't find him." "I found where he'd been." Miguel dismounted, his legs unsteady. "Judge Clayton changed his circuit route. Something about flooding near the Judith River. He's 200 miles north of where he should be." "When will he be back?" "May 5th, maybe the 6th if the roads are bad." Miguel's voice was hoarse. "A week after the auction." The words landed like stones in cold water. Garrett stood silent for a moment, then nodded. "You did what you could." "It wasn't enough." Miguel looked toward the house. "That girl's gonna lose everything because I couldn't ride fast enough." "It's not your fault." "Feels like it." After Miguel went to tend his horse, Garrett walked to the small cemetery behind the ranch house. 2 graves under a cottonwood tree, marked with simple wooden crosses. Sarah Ashford, beloved wife. Ruth Ashford, beloved daughter. He knelt in the mud. March had brought thaw, turning everything to cold slop, and tried to find words that wouldn't come. "I'm failing her." His voice was barely a whisper. "Just like I failed you." The wind moved through the cottonwood branches, still bare but budding. Spring coming, whether anyone was ready or not. "I was on that cattle drive when you got sick, Ruth. 200 miles away, chasing money I didn't need, building something I thought mattered." He touched the wooden cross. "And you died, asking for me." A crow called from somewhere distant. "Now there's another girl, same age, same—" His voice broke. "She looks at me sometimes like I'm the only thing standing between her and the dark, and I don't know how to save her." He stayed there until the cold seeped through his knees, until his legs cramped and his breath came out in white clouds. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Nora stood a few feet away, wrapped in Rosa's shawl, her face solemn. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not." Garrett stood, his knees protesting. "Shouldn't you be inside?" "I saw Miguel come back." She looked at the graves. "No judge. No judge." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Nora pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I wrote you a letter. In case tomorrow doesn't go the way we hope." "Nora, please, just take it." She pressed it into his hand. "I need you to know that even if I lose everything, you gave me something my uncle couldn't take away." Garrett unfolded the paper. Her handwriting was careful, precise, the kind taught by a mother who valued clarity. "Dear Mr. Ashford, if tomorrow I lose, know that you gave me a home when I had none. You taught me that family isn't blood. It's who'd walk through a blizzard to make sure you're safe, who'd spend money they don't have to prove you matter, who'd stand between you and the law when the law stops being just. You're the father I wish God had left me. And if I have to go on that train to St. Louis, I'll remember that once for a little while I had a place where I belonged. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." Nora Garrett read it twice, then a third time, his vision blurring. "I'm not giving up. His voice was rough. Tomorrow, we go to that courthouse. We show them everything, the fraud, the stolen money, the witnesses. We make them see. And if it's not enough, then I'll buy that land myself, every penny I have, and I'll gift it back to you in front of everyone. That's too much. It's not nearly enough. Garrett folded the letter carefully, tucked it in his vest pocket, over his heart. And Nora, when this is over, when Judge Clayton comes back and sorts out the legal mess, I'm filing to adopt you, proper, legal. Her eyes went wide. Not to replace your parents, not to make you forget. He knelt so they were eye level, but to make sure you have a name that can't be taken, a home that can't be sold, a family that chooses you, not because the law says so, but because we want to. Nora threw her arms around his neck, and Garrett held her while she cried, the first real tears he'd seen from her, like something had finally broken loose. When she pulled back, her face was blotchy, but determined. We're going to win tomorrow. Yes, we are. But that night, lying awake, Garrett stared at the ceiling and counted the cost. To outbid the railroad syndicate, he'd have to mortgage the ranch, sell off half his herd, risk everything he'd built, and he'd do it, without hesitation. At 4 a.m., he rose and went to the barn. By lantern light, he prepared the branding iron, heating it, checking the mark, making sure it was ready. Whitfield Ashford. 2 names joined. Tomorrow would decide whether that brand ever touched a calf's hide, or whether Nora Whitfield disappeared into the machinery of orphan trains and railroad empires, just another child the world decided didn't matter. April 28th dawned clear and cold, the kind of spring morning that promised warmth by noon but delivered frost at sunrise. The courthouse steps were packed by 9:30, over 100 people, maybe more, drawn by gossip and curiosity, and the sense that something significant was about to break. Nora stood with Garrett and Miguel at the base of the platform, her hands shaking despite the warmth of Rosa's good coat. Doc Brennan was somewhere in the crowd with his folder of evidence. Beatrice stood with 20 women forming a line on the courthouse steps, each holding a handwritten sign. Witness. The auctioneer took his position at 10 sharp. Beside him, Silas Cartwright stood in his finest suit, gold watch chain gleaming, and next to Silas, a stranger, tall, Eastern-dressed, with cold eyes and a leather satchel that probably held $20,000 in cash. Caldwell, the railroad man. Lot 47, the auctioneer called. 640 acres, Whitfield Estate. Prime Montana grassland, water rights included, positioned along proposed railway corridor. Opening bid $5,000. $8,000? Garrett's voice cut clear across the crowd. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. $12,000. Caldwell didn't even blink. $15,000. Garrett's jaw was set. The crowd went quiet. $15,000 was serious money. Ruin your life money for most men. $18,000. Caldwell's tone was bored, like he was ordering lunch. Garrett hesitated, just a heartbeat, and Nora's stomach dropped. $18,000. That was everything. The ranch, the herd, his future. $22,000. Garrett's voice rang out firm and final. The crowd gasped. Silas's face went white. Even Caldwell looked surprised. $22,000, the auctioneer repeated. Do I hear 23? Caldwell opened his satchel, looked inside, then shook his head. 20,000 was my limit. He snapped the case shut and looked at Silas with something like contempt. You said there wouldn't be competition. Going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice? Wait. A voice from the back of the crowd, old, authoritative, brooking no argument. The crowd parted, and through the gap walked Judge Clayton, dusty from travel, his beard grayer than Nora remembered, but unmistakable in his black coat and wide-brimmed hat. Miguel had found him after all. Your Honor, the auctioneer lowered his gavel. We weren't expecting. Clearly, Judge Clayton mounted the steps slowly, his boots heavy on the wood. Before this sale proceeds, I'd like to review the estate documents. I've received some disturbing reports. Silas's face had gone from white to gray. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So is fraud. The judge held out his hand. The guardianship papers, Mr. Cartwright. Now. Silas fumbled in his coat, pulled out the document. His hands were shaking. Judge Clayton read it slowly, his expression darkening. Then he looked at Doc Brennan. You have something to show me, Samuel? Doc climbed the steps, opened his folder. The original will, Your Honor, found in the bank vault. James and Martha Whitfield left everything to their daughter. Mr. Cartwright was never named executor. The judge examined both documents side by side, The crowd pressed closer, straining to hear. The signature on the guardianship petition doesn't match the signature on the will. Judge Clayton's voice carried across the square. Someone forged my approval. I can explain, Silas started. You'll have your chance. In court. Under oath. The judge looked at Silas's vest, at the gold watch chain. Is that your watch, Mr. Cartwright? Yes, it was a gift. May I see it? Silas's hand went to his pocket, but he was trapped. Refuse and look guilty. Comply and... He pulled out the watch. The judge took it, turned it over. J.W. The judge read the engraving aloud. James Whitfield. Funny sort of gift. Receiving a dead man's watch. The crowd's murmur turned ugly. It was payment for what? Debts you fabricated? Judge Clayton handed the watch to Nora. I believe this belongs to... child. Nora took it with trembling hands. The gold was warm from Silas's pocket. She could feel her father's initials under her thumb. Your Honor, I have testimony. Beatrice stepped forward. 20 women willing to attest to abuse, neglect, and starvation. And I have financial records. Doc produced another set of papers, showing systematic theft from multiple clients over 18 months, including a pattern of property sales where deposits never reached the rightful owners. That's privileged banking information. Silas's voice rose in panic. That's evidence of embezzlement. Judge Clayton's tone was ice. Sheriff Reeves. The sheriff had been waiting at the edge of the crowd. He moved forward now, handcuffs ready. Silas Cartwright, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and child endangerment. Sheriff Reeves snapped the cuffs on with more force than strictly necessary. You have the right to remain silent, though I suspect that ship has sailed. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some gasped. Mrs. Pritchard fainted and had to be caught by her husband. Garrett knelt in front of Nora, took her hands. The land is yours, by law, by right. No one can take it now. But you bid $22,000, which I'm not paying since the sale is voided. He smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. Though I meant what I said, every word. Judge Clayton cleared his throat. There's also the matter of guardianship. Miss Whitfield, you're 11 years old. You need a legal guardian. I'll file the petition today. Garrett stood, still holding Nora's hand. For adoption, if she'll have me. The judge looked at Nora. What do you say, child? You have a voice in this. Nora looked at Garrett, this man who'd spent a fortune he didn't have to, who'd stood between her and the law when the law was wrong, who'd given her a room with a carved wooden horse and never asked her to be anything but herself. Yes. Her voice was steady, clear. Yes, I'll have him. The crowd cheered again. Beatrice was crying. Doc was grinning. Miguel clasped Garrett's shoulder hard enough to bruise. And as Sheriff Reeves led Silas away through the crowd, past all the people he'd controlled with loans and fear and lies, Nora felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. Safe. Judge Clayton banged his gavel on the platform railing. This auction is hereby nullified. All Whitfield assets are restored to Nora Whitfield, effective immediately. He paused. And Mr. Ashford, come see me tomorrow about that adoption petition. Let's make this official. The trial took 3 days. Silas Cartwright sat in the defendant's chair while witness after witness dismantled his lies. Doc with medical records, Beatrice with testimony about the seller, ranchers who'd been skimmed, clients whose property sales had vanished into his pockets. Nora testified on the second day. She brought her mother's ledger and walked the court through every discrepancy, every fabricated debt, every dollar that didn't add up. Her voice never wavered. Judge Clayton sentenced him on the third day, 10 years in territorial prison, full restitution to victims, forfeiture of all assets, including the bank. You stole more than money, Mr. Cartwright. The judge's voice was granite. You stole a child's inheritance, her security, her trust in the world. 10 years won't restore what you took, but it's what the law allows me to give. Silas said nothing, just stared at his hands. Empty now, no gold watch, no lies left to tell. Caldwell, the railroad man, left town the same afternoon without a word to anyone. 2 weeks later, on a morning when the meadowlarks had returned and the grass was finally greening, Garrett and Nora stood in Judge Clayton's chambers for the adoption hearing. Miss Whitfield, the judge looked at her over his spectacles. Do you understand that if I grant this petition, your name will legally become Nora Whitfield Ashford? That Mr. Ashford will have all the rights and responsibilities of a parent? Yes, sir. And you want this? Freely, without coercion. Nora looked at Garrett, at this man who'd mortgaged his future on a courthouse platform, who paced at night when nightmares woke her, who'd taught her that family was choice, not blood. Yes, sir, I want this. Very well. Judge Clayton signed the papers with a flourish. Miss Nora Whitfield Ashford, you are hereby adopted into the Ashford family with all legal rights and privileges. Congratulations to you both. Garrett's eyes were suspiciously bright. Thank you, Your Honor. Outside, Rosa and Miguel were waiting with a basket of food. Doc and Beatrice had flowers. A small celebration, nothing fancy, but the warmth of it filled spaces Nora hadn't known were empty. That afternoon, back at the ranch, Garrett led Nora to the cattle pens where the spring calves were waiting for branding. Ready? He handed her the iron, already heated, the Whitfield Ashford mark glowing red at the tip. Will it hurt them? A little, but it heals quick. He guided her hands. And then they're marked. They belong. No one can claim them as strays. Nora pressed the iron to the calf's hide. Quick and firm, the way Garrett had shown her, the smell of singed hair and smoke. The calf bawled once, then settled. When she pulled the iron away, the mark was clear, W-A joined together, two names made one. Does it hurt to belong? She asked quietly. Garrett smiled. Only if you fight it. But you're not fighting anymore, are you? No. Nora watched the calf trot back to its mother, already forgetting the brief pain. I'm not. They branded 15 calves that day, 15 new lives carrying the mark of two families joined by choice and fire and stubborn refusal to let cruelty win. That evening, Nora walked to the cemetery behind the house. The cottonwood was fully leafed now, green and whispering in the spring breeze. She knelt between the two graves and planted wildflowers, lupine and poppies, red and blue. I'm Nora Whitfield Ashford now, she told the wooden crosses. I have a father again, not to replace mine. Nobody could, but to keep going with. She reached out, touched Ruth's marker. He still misses you. He probably always will. But I think maybe we're helping each other figure out how to be okay with missing people. A meadowlark sang from the fence post, clear and sweet. Nora stood, brushing dirt from her knees. On the cottonwood trunk, someone had carved something new, a small marker reading Ruth's sister in spirit, Nora, Garrett's work. Done quietly, without announcement. She traced the letters with her finger and felt tears come. Good tears this time, the kind that watered instead of drowning. When she got back to the house, supper was waiting. Rose's beef stew, fresh bread, milk still warm from the evening milking. Miguel was telling a story about a stubborn mare. Doc had stopped by with a new medical journal to show Rosa. Beatrice arrived late with a basket of books for Nora, family. Not the one she was born to, but the one she'd found in the wreckage. After everyone left and the dishes were washed and Rosa had gone to her cottage, Nora stood on the porch with Garrett, watching the stars come out. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. You saved yourself. Garrett's hand rested on her shoulder. I just gave you a place to stand while you did it. That's not nothing. No, he smiled. I suppose it's not. Inside, the carved wooden horse still sat on her windowsill, but now there was a second horse beside it. One Garrett had carved for her, painted to match her father's mare. 2 horses, 2 families. One girl who'd learned that belonging wasn't about blood or papers or courtroom declarations. It was about who'd walk through a blizzard to make sure you weren't alone in the dark, and who'd stay until spring came. Folks ask me sometimes, was justice served that day on the courthouse steps? I tell them justice wasn't the gavel, or the arrest, or even the 10 years Silas Cartwright spent learning what it meant to be powerless. Justice was 20 mothers who could have stayed silent. Justice was a doctor who risked everything to break into a vault. Justice was a rancher who bid $22,000 on a piece of land just to give it away. I learned 3 things that spring. First, family isn't who shares your blood, it's who'd spend their last dollar to write your name in ink. Second, a child's voice doesn't matter until adults choose to listen. And third, the law protects paper, people protect each other. By June, the meadowlarks were nesting in the fence posts Garrett and I mended together. Wildflowers covered the hill where Ruth rested, poppies and lupine, red and blue like a promise kept. I'd stand there mornings watching the sun turn the Rockies gold, and I'd think, Papa and Mama gave me a name. Garrett gave me a future. But the land I earned myself by refusing to disappear. 34 years later, when I donated 500 acres for Montana's first orphanage, I had that branding iron mounted above the entrance. Not to mark ownership, to remind every child who walked through those doors, you already belong, you just need someone brave enough to witness it. The sign beneath it reads, Whitfield Ashford Home for Children, founded 1920, because families who'd walk through a blizzard for you. And on cold nights, when the wind howls down from the mountains the way it did that winter I was 11, I still hear it. The sound of a dog barking, a door opening, lantern light spilling into darkness, the sound of someone choosing not to look away.